And that's one of the things I wanted to touch on with you, which is kind of this dichotomy that we have in healthcare, at least in the US and probably to a large extent in Canada, where most people who go to a doctor, they go to a clinic, they go to their family doctor, they're not given enough time to really get to be known, to really be understood. But that's not something you can afford to do in the emergency room, because whether it's a resuscitation that's coming through the door, or it's a person who's complaining of one thing but they might be, seeking something else, they have like ulterior motives, or a person who comes in and they're not really sure why you're there, but you have to coax out of them the recent abuse or trauma that they experienced, and you really have to be locked in for all of those things.
What I've noticed with a lot of healthcare workers, and first within myself, is that when you're in an emergency, your nervous system is primed to prepare for the next thing that comes in that can completely dysregulate your nervous system. And sometimes, if you don't process that and take advantage of that, having some type of spiritual hygiene, some way to metabolize that experience, it can lead to a dysregulated healthcare experience that then transpires not only onto yourself, but onto your patient, and maybe more selfishly saying, onto your loved ones. And the world gets someone who ultimately ends up being dysregulated.
What practices have you adopted to be able to manage this? And not just manage this, I mean, to recover. Like, you could have, a couple of shifts, even one shift that's for anyone else would be traumatizing, but you have to just go home, recover, come back the next day.
I don't know what your work schedule's like, but I just did 25 of 27 days. And I can tell you the experience in my body right now is one that I have to really invite back in. I feel apart from myself at times.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast. I'm your host, Remnant MD, and my guest today is Dr. Kaveh Kavusi. Kaveh is another one of the physicians who reached out to me after I started writing online. And we started talking and exchanging some information, and eventually realized that we're both from Toronto, or at least, I spent most of my younger years in Toronto. And we ended up meeting. Well, initially, I think we did a podcast remotely on his podcast, which didn't end up getting published because of technical difficulties, but then we actually met in person in Toronto. And, ever since, he's become someone that I really enjoy talking to and a close friend. And one of the reasons that I enjoy talking to him and that I have him on is because I find that every time I talk to him, he seems to focus more on the human aspect, not just of health, but just overall, like everyday things that you might, converse with someone about. And it seems like that comes with a lot of personal, spiritual transformation and journey. And that's one of the things I really enjoy talking with him about, and what I really like about him as a person. So, Kaveh, why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Hey, Remnant, thanks for having me. And thank you for that intro. It's a great memory lane to run down. I remember during the time that we met that I was working in the emergency room. I was in my third year of practice, and I felt pretty alone in physicians who were able to show up for their patients, where that was the majority. But the people that had maintained a capacity to remain connected to their humanity and their philosophical foundations, I felt pretty alone in. And so I looked online, and I was communicating online, and I was pretty hard pressed to find people that I felt resonance with. Then came across some of the stuff that you were sharing, and it really spoke to me. And I was really grateful at this time that despite being at a distance, there was an opportunity to connect with voices like yours to at least bounce ideas off to see, are you experiencing this as well too, where we're in service of our patients, but there's an aspect of our humanity that's being set aside. And we really connected there. And I'm grateful that that's something that was able to be addressed in that moment, because helped me find a little bit of peace at a time where I felt really alone during the COVID experience. And I was really grateful after to maintain this connection, because outside of the calamity of what that was, now we get to see how we can bring more of that humanity and philosophy forward, not just for other healthcare workers, but first for ourselves. And that's one of the big foundations that I have in my life, and I know exists within yours. And while we're at a distance, we'll just keep these podcast style conversations going, inviting others to consider that as well too. And that's probably one of my most important things that I carry with me. And I work emergency medicine here in Toronto. Lucky for you to have gotten out. But I feel that one of my advantages of being a physician is that I have my humanity non-negotiably available at bedside, and sometimes to a detriment. And so, but I feel that when we're in service of people and patients, that's something that's a non-negotiable ingredient for a healthcare provider to be having available to them. And so I guess we'll divulge into that, but that's one of the things that I feel is most important for me and that I find really resonant within you too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of directions that we can take that. I mean, the one that's more concerned about you would be like, how did you get to this? But the one that I think is more important to dive into is, like you said, the ability to maintain that human focus while you're overworked, overstressed, trying to figure out how to handle all of the stuff that comes through the door, especially as an emergency physician, because all sorts of, you're in a major city, and I've done emergency as a student, as an intern in major cities, and it's crazy. Like you don't know what to do when like three different things come in at the same time, and they're all really emergencies. It's not just someone coming in with, my knee hurts or my back hurts or something. And that's one of the things I wanted to touch on with you, which is kind of this dichotomy that we have in healthcare, at least in the US and probably to a large extent in Canada, where most people who go to a doctor, they go to a clinic, they go to their family doctor, they're not given enough time to really get to be known, to really be understood. But that's not something you can afford to do in the emergency room, because whether it's a resuscitation that's coming through the door, or it's a person who's complaining of one thing, but they might be, seeking something else, they have like ulterior motives, or a person who comes in and they're not really sure why you're there, but you have to coax out of them the recent abuse or trauma that they experienced. And you really have to be locked in for all of those things. So how do you perceive this? How do you balance it?
Well, there's an art to medicine that is also that accompanies the knowledge that you're supposed to have. I've come to appreciate most individuals who it to a fault. People maybe don't take as much care of their health as we would like for them to be able to do. There's more information available than ever. There's more tools available than ever for people to be owning their health. But a lot of people have outsourced it, saying there's someone there that's going to take care of it if I need it. And until then, I'm not really going to do much about it. And it ends up being a little challenging because the moment that they arrive in need of healthcare, they might have been so far away from any level of awareness to what's going on to them that then pulling information out in a story is like pulling teeth. And I'm really grateful on the other side where you have someone who arrives and they're very aware of what's going on in their health. They're up to date on things that have been going on. They've been doing regular check-ins. They've been living an intentional, healthy life that when they arrive there, I'm complimentary to the level of care that they need. Now, in the emergency room, it's a little different because people don't come there to show you how great life is. They show you because there's something that's immediately pressing them. And sometimes that thing that's pressing them isn't even something urgent to their health, but it's timely to bring peace to an aspect of their psyche that's feeling health anxious or health concerned or some type of pain burden. And so being able to discern that is really powerful, and hopefully being able to disseminate information from you to them that ultimately ends up empowering them is enormous. Now, on the other side, what I've noticed with a lot of healthcare workers and first within myself is that when you're in emergency, your nervous system is primed to prepare for the next thing that comes in that can completely dysregulate your nervous system. And sometimes, if you don't process that and take advantage of that, having some type of spiritual hygiene, some way to metabolize that experience, it can lead to a dysregulated healthcare experience that then transpires not only onto yourself, but onto your patient, and maybe more selfishly saying onto your loved ones. And the world gets someone who ultimately ends up being dysregulated. So there's an important hygiene that's important there that takes you down from emergent possible not pulling that slot machine all the time and bringing back out of the casino, if
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah,
say it
yeah.
that way. Yeah. Um, yeah, there's no other way around it because your information and your knowledge is going to be demanding 10 out of 10 perfectionism from you all the time, but your nervous system and your humanity are going to be speaking a very different language, and I hope that you're able to listen to both.
Yeah, so what do you use? What do you adopt? What practices have you adopted to be able to manage this? And not just manage this, I mean, to recover. Like you could have, a couple of shifts, even one shift that's for anyone else would be traumatizing, but you have to just go home, recover, come back the next day.
I don't know what your work schedule's like, but I just did 25 of 27 days. And I can tell you the experience in my body right now is one that I have to really invite back in. I feel apart from myself at times. And it's it gives you a first person experience that is important to acknowledge, like feeling an edge or feeling an extreme to know where a human body can go to bring you back. I think I may have mentioned this before, but one of the beautiful things about being human is how incredibly adaptable we are. And one of the perils of being human is how incredibly adaptable we are. We can adapt into a scenario or a circumstance slowly but efficiently enough that we don't notice that our system has gotten to a level where you are in the red line, you're in the red zone, your system's about to shut down. And so my some of the practices that I've cultivated and that I share with residents starts with breath. It starts with slowing a breath down before and after. And I have a four-step process, which is noticing, then there's awareness, then there's an opportunity for action or behavior to change, which leads to an opportunity for a new outcome. Now, all of those precludes opportunity because there's the opportunity to notice first, which leads to the opportunity to be aware, which leads to the opportunity to have an action or behavior that shifts, which leads to an opportunity for a new outcome. And I'll say this, that when you bring that in is when you are tired, when you're exhausted, when you're depleted, when you've had a high affective burden for prolonged periods of time in whatever you're doing, your nervous system needing that reset, we'll say, is often processing everything that you need, and the gift is often making space for it. And to make space often requires you to notice, be aware, take action on it for that thing to change. So it ends up being simple at the end of the day.
So that's two things you've mentioned, breath work and then this four-step, system that you have to, how should we put this? To keep your eyes open, so to speak, or your heart open to yourself.
Yeah.
So what else? Are these the two things that you use, or is there more?
Something that you and I have spoken about so much is nutrition. And minimizing next to no coping. I don't drink. I don't take any substances. My nature is like the nutrition that we reach for is fundamental to how we are going to be experiencing life. But honestly, something that has taken me a long time has been setting up boundaries. And this block, I was actually not good at setting those up because there should be parameters where you know that your nervous system is getting into 70, 80, 90% empty tank needing to be refilled, and it's on me to take ownership, accountability, and responsibility in order to apply that. And I don't know if this is just a circumstance of part of the how my identity shows up in this role, or if it's scarcity mindset that's keeping me saying yes when I should be saying no. But there's elements of those that intertwine that when I become more aware again, there's an opportunity to apply boundaries to a greater degree. And often a boundary where you say no to something ends up being a yes to life. And that's what's necessary, I think, for both longevity, um, your vitality, and your capacity to maintain the depth in the thing that you do. And if it's bringing your humanity forward into moments where you're in service of others, that's a necessity to be protecting.
Yeah, that's one of the things that my wife struggled with as well in the past before we had children was whenever she would have a job, a task, whether it was at school or with her employer, she would just give all the time, all the effort that was available to her, and then have nothing left for herself. And that's one of the things that we haven't spoken about this yet, but one of the models that I'm developing, the foundational health model, is that there are four pillars that I view to be the most important thing to vitality, which is a word you used as well. And I like that word. I think vitality is a really good word for this. And one of it is meaning, spirit, whatever word you want to use to describe this thing. And actually, I'm wearing a shirt very purposely that says "The soul is garden," and it is, and you can't ignore your soul. You can't ignore the thing that the animating thing within you yearns for. So, did you have trouble with this? Or it sounds like you're having trouble with it now if you're doing 25 out of 27. Like, how is it? How is your journey through this ability to navigate these demands changed, or has it changed? Are you working on it? How are you working on it?
Well, I love that shirt, the Soul's Garden. It makes me think that you're saying you can't ignore it, but you can neglect it. You can neglect that garden. And one of my favorite analogies in life is the garden of life, where you have seeds that are planted and there's a soil that's there, and there are a multitude of seeds and there's nature surrounding it. If there's an aspect of that garden that we tend to in one corner, it might be at the expense of all these other ones that may be the most nourishing seeds that just require your attention, some time, shedding light, giving attention, being the sun, watering it, giving new life. But if there's some seeds that we keep nourishing that we think that's the thing that's going to grow, what ends up being is a monocrop. And we know what monocrops do to the world. But that monocrop is often a neglect or an absence of the soul. It's not, soul is a multitude. And egoic type protection in the garden is that monocrop. And I catch that, and the game is always going to be noticing and then coming back into it. The
Yeah.
first thing you can do is notice. And um, your wife has a very familiar story that I think everyone can find themselves in. And one of one of the signs of the evolution of someone's soul, I believe, is their ability to catch that sooner, take action on it sooner, and say the yeses when they need to and say the nos when they need to as well. And I'm in a period of my life right now where it feels non-negotiable that it has to be. And I felt like this was the last time, and we'll check in a year to see if that I actually apply it, that this was the last edge that I pushed myself through.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of those things like people like the reason why, like, it might seem like it's overblown that I'm using spirit or meaning or soul, whatever, as one of the four pillars. The other pillars are like consumption, habitat, activity. And a lot of people wouldn't think that that is as important as, say, your diet or your physiology, broadly speaking, or how active you are. One of the things that I learned from ancient, medical literature is this importance. And they make a very good case. Take, for example, a person who with a broken spirit, so to speak, or someone who's ignoring their spirit or their soul or the meaning in their life. They can just kill themselves. And that's really bad for their health. There's no coming back from that. So to think that like only diet or activity, fitness, whatever, are more important than the meaning in your life is foolish, because we all know people that, either kill themselves quickly, unfortunately, or kill themselves slowly through a series of bad decisions. But in either case, the impact on their health and their vitality is as real as anything else. So, yeah, you need to say no more. But how do you, because especially in your case, like, you're an emergency physician and things happen and someone has to pick up the slack if something happens unfortunately to someone, or something comes up, or what, happens at my workplace too. Someone gets sick, you have to pick up their shifts, and I work shifts that are not easy to jump into and jump out of because I work overnight most of the time. And but you still got to do it. Like, someone's got to do the work. So how do you balance this?
I think this is speaking to myself, but also a global phenomenon right now where a lot of people are feeling that the thing that they're doing, they question or are not reminded of as easily of the meaning of it or the importance of it or the mission behind it. And I think that when there's something, a why that's greater than the thing that you're doing, the tether is it anchors into your soul to a greater degree. And I feel that medicine toggles between that. I think everyone can feel the thing that they're doing is a job, or they can also perceive it and experience it as a mission. I may have mentioned this with you before, but I say with a lot of patients where I'll meet them at these intersections of their life where they're wondering, they're really burdened with something health wise, but you find that there's a something that they're really working through. And I ask them, like, is the thing that they're doing more feeling like you better effing pay me for this, or I can't believe I get paid to do this,
Mm-hmm.
or you're forcing me to do this, or I can't believe I get to do this.
Yeah.
And mission is closer to that, meaning is closer to that. I would say suicidality is closer to this and less towards that because of the tether that it brings. And one aspect of medicine that I feel so grateful for is that it tethers me to the reality of the everyday human across a spectrum that I don't think many other vocations could do. Because people are open, honest, and they see you as the caregiver archetype, not mom or dad, but something that approximates to that. And so they're willing to open up on the things that actually do speak to the language of the heart, the language of the soul, the language of their spirit. And if there's an understanding or capacity for their healthcare provider in front of them to have that, I feel like I have a responsibility then to show up there. And that's why I sometimes overexert myself because I feel like I'm meeting people at important intersections that too often, and maybe you've had this where you're like, I'm so grateful I was the physician that
Mm-hmm.
was there in that moment for them. And I don't want to ever let that go. And I'm deeply honored that I get to meet people at those moments. And that's one of the things that pulls me even on my toughest days.
Yeah. Before we started, you said you hadn't been working so much on the, let's put this, the creative element of your life, and you felt that it was suppressed.
Yeah.
What's, first of all, do you know what's doing the suppressing?
Yeah. Yeah. Right now, at the time that we're recording this, I there's conflict going on in the world, and it's tough to shy away from. Our nervous system's already so activated in the thing that we do, and I can't help, especially because of my genes, my soul, my cells exist in a place that's directly involved with that conflict. I feel tethered to awareness of what's going on there, and I get lost in a lot of the calamity of information that's being passed back and forth. And years ago, I heard a line from Denzel Washington, of all people, and he said, "If you don't watch the news, you're uninformed, and if you watch the news, you're misinformed."
Mm-hmm.
And that really stuck with me that like we find ourselves in between information. And right now, the way that information manipulates itself or is being presented in a way that where opinion is sometimes demonstrated as truth, whereas an incomplete thought is offered, where something is said and then the other thing happens. I personally feel like I suffer through some aspect of logical fallacies and cognitive disintegration, and it kills my life spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm continuing to feed into that because I feel that there's a if I don't pay attention moment, something will happen. And this has pulled me away from the art of life. And I've sometimes, I don't know if you feel this, but when there's a conflict going on, I feel there's some type of psychosis when people are still focusing on their business or their work when there's something enormous to be addressing. Yes, it may be out of my power. Yes, it may be out of my control, but there's still a part of us that knows that we are part of a bigger community that we can seek to coexist in. And so I see that, relate internally, and then share information to the best of my ability that seeks to reharmonize and coexist. So maybe art hasn't stopped, but art has transmuted in a way from where I thought I would be working on things right now, like doing what you're doing, which is amazing.
Yeah. Um, COVID really got my attention in this landscape of information that you're referring to that seems sometimes overwhelming, paralyzing, debilitating, and suppressive. And that's kind of how I started this whole thing, how I started the blog and now this podcast. But since COVID, I've started to notice the same patterns emerging in people who I thought had their head on straight and then the next thing comes up, and then the next thing comes up, and eventually everyone's got their, I don't want to call it blind spot. Sometimes it is a blind spot. Other times it's a weakness. Other times it's a sensitivity. Other times it's, I don't know, like a personal relationship, whatever it is. And I like that quote from Denzel because everywhere I look now, are you familiar with the concept of kayfabe? Okay, so kayfabe is a pro wrestling term, like WWE pro wrestling term, where it's essentially a reference to the story that the wrestlers are trying to convey to the audience, right? There's the choreography, which is their wrestling, and then there's the story that the choreography is being used to deliver to the audience. Because people who watch it, I think, I don't know, I'm not a watcher, but from what I read, they watch it in large part also for the story, because there's recurring characters, there's themes, there's plots, there's plot twists, whatever. And kayfabe is that story, that narrative that they're trying to uphold and to convey. And everything you see on the stage or on the ring, that's the choreography to convey the story that they want to convey. And when a wrestler breaks character, this is like breaking kayfabe, this like fourth invisible wall. Everything I see now on the news, on Twitter, on social, whatever, especially the more produced things. It could be a very well respected or widely viewed podcast or a news segment or whatever. It just looks like kayfabe to me. Like I don't know what is real and I don't know what is choreography. You know, you see a person go, I don't know, let's say Piers Morgan or something, and he's got a bunch of people arguing with one another and they're trying to own each other. And it's, well, the debate is the choreography, the narrative is the opinions that they're conveying in this choreography that they're trying to convey to the audience, and they're trying to see whose narrative wins over the other's narrative. Is there any truth in there? Probably. There's kernels of truth. That's how these things start. But how am I going to get to the bottom without what you're talking about giving up a huge part of your soul, your attention, your bandwidth? So maybe this is irresponsible. Maybe I'm going to find that this is going to backfire. But right now, I'm at peace because I just don't, like, I see them. I see these acts being purported in social media, in the news, whatever, and people who discuss it in real life. I just don't give them weight because I think, well, how do you know? Like, are you there? Are you from there? Do you live there? Were you there at the event? You weren't. You're just a bystander, just like I'm a bystander if I talk about these things. So I don't know how, like, is this how you perceive it? Because since COVID, like one event after another just made me think I shouldn't take people as seriously as I used to.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, you were saying how there was a group of people that you trusted, confide in, and then suddenly they say something, and there's almost an egoic tendency to disregard them. I think it's important for us to even catch that because that's reductionism 101, where we cancel all because of a part we don't find agreements with. And I feel that that's an arena that we should be ourselves working on maintaining the thread despite disharmony on a subject. But I think what we found is people were taking more and more extreme things that they were suddenly separating the line that we all walk together on. For the incentive model, unfortunately, that is one that you're more extreme, you're heard, you stand out. If you say something's more blatant, more illogical, like the incentive models, unfortunately, pulled people to mess up KFAB and play with KFAB. I don't know if I'm even pronouncing that right, but that's a deep, unfortunate aspect of it, man. And I personally, I feel like that completely erodes the foundation of health
Hmm?
for an individual. And my personal experience over the past 2 years has been, specifically the past 2 years, was I felt like I had access to a labyrinth of information and insights and perceptions and fables and allegories in my psyche. And as I became more and more exposed to the discordance that I saw through the information streams, I found myself experiencing less and less access to those aspects of myself. And I was feeling like doors were closed that I couldn't even go to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've found myself, because I'm unavailable to access a lot of that labyrinth that I normally engage with, usually through conversations like this, or even just quietly contemplating. I now resort to that type of absolute disarray of information that exists, because somewhere in there, usually at the intersection of what everyone is not saying, but there's something in between, is where truth lies. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really tough to actually get there, because someone says one thing really far to the left, one says something really far to the right, and the truth is somewhere near the center. And that's where I feel that it's a muscle to be developing towards, but it's deeply exhausting. And I like that you're taking a softer, more graceful approach to that. And I feel like that would be an amazing exercise for all of us to do for ourselves, because at the very least, like, the world is going to be this way, and it needs people who have re-regulated nervous systems anyway, to be a pillar for people to reconsider where they're at. And if we're all in like nervous system dysregulation, it's difficult to see that, because human being tendency is not to necessarily call one another out, it's to find others who enable one another's coping behaviors. And so, and someone who copes a particular way will find someone else who does, and then the agreement quietly ends up being, I'm not going to judge you as long as you don't judge me.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who has taken space is able to soften, and then that other person can't help but reconsider themselves when they see that person. So you're a big portion of that for anyone who comes in contact with you.
I thank you. Yeah, that's something that again, like I feel like a broken record because a lot of what I write and talk about is ancient wisdom, and I can't take credit for having developed this approach de novo. I did, experience plays a role. It hardens you. The saying of steel, sharpens steel, but yet you can't really. My dad would tell me these things too. He's like, you can't really take things too seriously. Don't take things too seriously because if you do, you're gonna find that it's hurting you more than anyone else. Like and you have to guard that garden, the heart. You have to guard it with all your being, and I don't mean guard as in like prevent people from coming close to you. It's just relax, take a breather, sleep on it, come back to it. And one of the benefits that I have with the life that I've constructed for my family, I know a lot of people aren't in the situation to have this, is that I've tried to, me and my wife, we've tried to craft an environment where our nervous system isn't constantly being bombarded and dysregulated. And so maybe that's the key. That's made it a lot easier for us to deal with a lot of the stuff that comes through these avenues that almost, not almost. I'm going to let the conspiratorial side of me out. It is intentional. It's meant to weaken you, to detach you, to exhaust you, so that when something needs to be done by people who want to do it, you're just going to say, oh, okay. Either you're
Yeah.
exhausted to pay attention, or you're so afraid that you're going to think, oh, yeah, they're doing this to help us. Let them. Are
Amen.
they?
Well, who's they? Who's they in this context?
Well, whoever it is that's trying to, Noam Chomsky has this term, manufactured consent. It can be any party that's conspiring to manufacture consent from another group of people. Usually that group of people is larger than the group of people that have a mission. And so they're trying to manufacture the larger group's consent so that the small can actually do the thing that they want without much resistance, revolt, etc., etc. There is no one they, obviously. There's lots of theys. And the they is usually the people that are trying to enact something, maybe not to the advantage of, or in worst cases, to the direct disadvantage of the larger, subset of the population that they reside in, have influence over, or whatever it is. Like I don't think conspiracies aren't real. Everything is a conspiracy. Like one of my favorite quotes from Catherine Austin Fitts is like, if you don't know that everything is a conspiracy, then you're like a stooge in a conspiracy. Like a business is a conspiracy. It's a group of people working together to succeed that business at the expense of the businesses that they're competing with. That's a conspiracy. Everything. So the question is, what's your conspiracy? Do you have one? You should build one because you have a family and you have people you care about and your friends and the closest people that you want to make life better for. It doesn't have to come at the expense of the people that are around you, but you got to have a plan. And that's a conspiracy. You're conspiring with those people in your circle to make a better life for yourselves. So I don't
Do you
know,
know the etymological word of that? Like
which,
with conspiracy was that one of the etymological words of that, the root is respirar. Respirar, which is to breathe in spirit.
hmm,
And con is together, so to breathe in spirit together.
right.
And the church back in the day found that that was one of the biggest threats to them. And so
Hmm.
this word ended up being bastardized, which is actually when it's one of the most beautiful things that we can do, and we thrive in communities, or even we thrive. What's the opposite of thriving in communities if you conspire in the worst kind of way? So there's like dark, negative, but yeah, that word is very important for me. And I remember at the best of times when you come together with really great people, the the feeling of they dissipates when you feel like you're breathing among those who are on a higher frequency, what they're taking in.
Yeah. Or even on the same frequency, like being around those that understand you is powerful, even if you might be misled or, in your ambitions or your goals or whatever, the opposite of thrive. But it's a powerful feeling, and anything that's going to get in the way of you finding your people, well, that can be weaponized. And I think that's what's largely at the root of the divisions that we see today, yesterday, tomorrow, whatever is going to be the event du jour that's going to be used to divide people. And what I like is just to talk to people in real life, make sure that I'm talking to a human being and try to do it as face to face as possible. Because then you find that people aren't like what you're seeing on these information landscapes. They're not even close. I'm in a relatively very conservative part of this continent. And people who you would think would hold one view because of what you see online. I had a conversation with my brother about this recently. But when I talk to them in person, they seem totally reasonable, rational. They have a good sense of what's going on and they're not extreme in their views as people are online. I don't know. Is that your experience? That must be, right? It seems like that's the common human experience and everything else is being used to detach us from the human.
Well, man, I think something that's coming up for me right now that's I feel is, if I were to think foundationally, is I feel that we have come very far apart from having a common foundation that connects us all. And we are really good at beating the drum and sharing the story of what makes us different from another and upholding that and at times transgressing through that story. Where the more powerful thing that would bring coexistence and harmony to this world, that would be a foundational shift for all of humanity, would to be agreeing on what we all share, which is a temporary gift at life, equal value to our human existence that's no different from other. And that alone, the travesty is that that is so, it hits against a lot of the ideas of a lot of belief systems and a lot of communities, but that's where the work lies. And I like when we live in certain countries that, independent of what your culture, your religion, your upbringing, where you're from, your age, your gender, you can practice the opportunity to coexist and be in harmony. And I feel that conversations should be having in those arenas, whereas people staying as spectators. And I think the online experience is interesting because it gives the opportunity to be in arena for many people, but a lot of people end up being spectators and finding their own small corners where they uphold the separation stories rather than the cohesive stories. And a foundation is not really strong if it is separative. If it is one that is a base that is solid, that invites others in and can and hold others in too, especially the person you arguably hate the most. Now we're getting closer to a world that is softer, more graceful, and embodies what I believe is what life truly is.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Yeah, well, that brings us to something maybe we can talk about medicine again, where it's well, there's two things, right? There's the industrial aspect of, modern society, maybe modern Western society, but also to a large extent the world, where you have, so like my current hypothesis is that the current, medical paradigm is a hangover of the Industrial Revolution, where mass production, compartmentalized production, modularity, whatever. You understand the chain of production. That led to many things. That led to a way of thinking. That led to a way of productivity. That also led to an accrual of capital. That led to the abundance of certain things. I don't know, like petrochemicals. And then that eventually leads to a bastardization of an art form, which, as far as I can tell, has been more or less consistent for thousands of years until the Industrial Revolution. And then the other element of this is technology good for your health or bad for your health? And how do you decide? How do you balance? Because as we're discussing, these are technological revelations that allow the things that we were just talking about to occur. And in many ways, it's bad for our health. But in some ways, it's good because then I get to meet people like yourself and others who have, reached out or I've reached out to, and that builds on the spirit and works on the foundation that you were talking about. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I think medicine has always had an important part in the human experience. It's been necessary for survival and for caring. And I think that over time, I do agree that the Industrial Revolution played a role in how it reframed the psyche of how business was done in conjunction with how things needed to be done in society anyway. And so it at times infringed on art if it had the possibility on infringing on the bottom line of whatever that business entailed. And it's tough to tell without speaking to an individual what their motivation is, why they went into that line of work in the first place, if they went in for the art of it. Maybe they did long ago, but why are they in it now? And if the business aspect of their psyche is the primary part that leads, they have an opportunity to reframe it in a different way, because then they'll realize that, well, I wasn't providing care, I was providing transactional service masked as care. And I
Hmm.
feel that some of the greatest healthcare providers are able to shift that perception, and they're able to live between those two states of awareness that exist within them. One that recognizes that we are in service of the care of someone in their potential most fragile moments, but also I have to pay taxes. And so
Yeah.
those two things are, and I need to have money to survive. But if there was a way that the person was able to embrace or find a balance that the art is never infringed upon, and the business model was willing to be sacrificed at the expense of the human spirit of the person providing and the person receiving, that would be a really big shift that I think would reestablish a lot of trust that I think medicine has been losing and is continuing to lose. People will still come to allopathic medicine in their time of need. A lot of them are very well intended, and a lot of them end up leaving disappointed because they didn't feel seen, heard, acknowledged, or understood as the humans that they were. And they
Hmm.
felt transactionally served. I like to start saying that rather than cared for.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things there. One of which is when you said pay taxes, it reminded me. I recently read a book about Genghis Khan, and I'm sure most people have the standard line about Genghis Khan and the Mongols, but Genghis was one of the most progressive people in, I think, any part of history, even modern history. And one of the things he implemented as law in his empire was that there were certain occupations that didn't have to pay taxes. One of them was doctors. And so, bringing this back to the financial stuff, you have the financial incentive, which of course is a big factor. You and I both know people who are more financially driven than humanly driven. Sometimes it gets the better of them, even if they are well intentioned. But also in the West, at least in the US and increasingly in Canada as well, they start out their career heavily, indebted. So if you want to take advantage of a group of people to do things that might not otherwise be on their moral compass, so to speak, then maybe you tax them, you indebt them early on, you make sure that the conditions on which they're given the ability to practice are extremely aligned with industry intent. So, to a large extent, the doctors are a product of the system that bears them. But to another extent, they're a product of the standards that we use to inculcate them into the profession. So, like, one thing I'll ask you, and this might be controversial, I don't know, I don't care. I don't think cowards make good doctors. What do you think about that?
Can you elaborate on it?
Yeah, people who can be bullied, people who can be nudged in a certain direction that deviates them from the proper moral orientation, ethical orientation when it comes to the practice of medicine. Take your pick, like people who suddenly don't want to see any patients because there's a respiratory virus going around that everyone is terrified about because they've been on social media for too long. Um, any number of manifestations. I'm of the firm belief that a coward, as a doctor, it's only a matter of time before he starts hurting people.
Yeah, I agree. So that person has a deadline for either malpractice or a poor outcome for somebody else. And along the way, they're going to lose a lot of people that have any desire to be around them. And they're going to have a very lonely journey unless they find others who act similarly. Because this is a human career path, and people need to have humanity there. And when there's aspects of the ego that are getting into too like higher levels of extreme burden, like bordering on narcissistic style, that type of pathology, I feel like it's more pathological states of personality traits that then, if they're not checked, can show up as cowardice. And if no one challenges them on it, they're going to, unfortunately, that's going to spread into a lot of places and either isolate the person or have them eventually no longer be able to work because it's gonna lead to some poor outcome.
Yeah. What do you think of the standards that we use to inculcate people into medical school? I mean, you're in Canada, and from my recollection and in my opinion, Canada has one of the more stringent, I don't know, stringent, higher standards, maybe more diverse standards for welcoming people into medical school. It's not just you get a score on an exam, you have your GPA, and maybe you did some volunteering with some letters of recommendation. At least this was the case when I was a student in Toronto. There was a little bit more of a breadth perspective. Like you're bringing in someone that really like appreciates the diversity of life and human experience, things of this nature. This is one of the things that I've always respected about the Canadian medical system, that I just don't see as much in the United States, and it's probably for a whole host of reasons. But how is that currently over there, and are you able to keep a pulse on it or something?
I can only speak from my experience, but the my experience was one that was nasty enough that I got to pull out a lot of awareness from it, and I was able to also ask the question later on from other physicians. But when I was going through residency, I went for an interview for the extra, like the plus one for emergency. And as I got into the interview, just before I went in, this woman came up and she said, she was one of the candidates as well too, and she said, "Oh, you're applying for this program as well too?" And she's like, You have no chance. They already know who they're going to be choosing. This is just for show. Like I already know I'm one of the people that got it." And she just came with this catty attitude, and I just was so it was just before I was going into the door, and I went in there and I actually completely blanked. I completely blanked. I showed no aspect of myself. I gave no opportunity. The ego of that woman won in that moment, and I succumbed to it. So I saw an aspect of myself where the story of imposter syndrome actually showed itself there for me. And it took a little while to actually realize that, like, what happened there, that she was actually able to have an impression that actually had me suppress any aspect of what I would have known in any other circumstance. Um, and I find that a lot of people in medicine actually have to reinforce aspects of their ego. And maybe this is controversial, but I feel that a lot of healthcare providers um, didn't have a very strong social upbringing. And so they reinforced aspects of their intelligence and their knowledge while they're growing up. And then at the same time, society reinforced you are of higher value when you do this type of vocation. And mom and dad are more proud of you if you do this type of thing. And so they get siloed into that type of direction, not necessarily improving their capacity for social skills, their emotional range, but and then they go up and up and up. And in medicine, one of the things that it does, either intentionally or as an unfortunate byproduct, is it teaches you to set aside a lot of the signals from your humanity
Mm-hmm.
and from your body that maybe this is not the direction you should be going. You work long hours, you work hard, you push your brain to the absolute limit. Now you arrive and you graduate and you're in a position where you haven't really worked on your emotional range, your social capacity is not there, and now you're in service of the care of another.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's going to be an egoic reinforcement that does happen. And so some games may inadvertently push people into ego inflation. And that ego inflation may, at times, if it's not checked or softened, may spill onto others, hurt others, potentially even harm others. And I think that that happens, that has spilled into the exponential rise of the voice that anyone can have online, that someone who hasn't had a grounded capacity, they're not foundationally connected to their soul, their spirit, but they are deeply ingrained in the identity of the healthcare provider,
Mm-hmm.
then they live in a state that could really benefit from humbling, but that humbling often is at the expense of their identity completely disintegrating. So they'll do anything at their expense and their reach to not experience that thing. And I feel like that's the state of a lot of medicine right now, that a lot of people are in positions that could benefit from deep egoic, the word is dissolution, but it would be at the expense of everything they know, the system that they trust, the system that they depend upon.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a terrifying thought,
Yeah,
but it's a
and
necessary one.
absolutely. And that brings back to the first controversial of many statements that I made, which is that medicine's not for cowards. Like, if you're afraid of your ego dissolving because you have to change your perspective on life and the way you've been going about it, this is one of the ways that it will manifest. You're going to hit a roadblock, and then you're too afraid to let go of the things that you feel are an important part of your identity for whatever reason. And so you're less likely to undergo that transformation. Um, this reminds me of a I don't know if you've watched this show yet, but it's a Turkish production of Rumi, the poet. And in one of the first episodes, I love that show, by the way. In one of the first episodes, he's talking to a friend of his who's an astronomer, and he's trying to build a device so that he can understand and measure the movements of celestial bodies, an astrolabe. And Rumi asks him, he says, "Why are you doing this?" And he says, "Well, then I can get some information about the stars." And he goes, "Do you think if you get more information, you'll be closer to the truth? Because the truth isn't known in your head. The truth is known in your heart." And you can interpret this in so many ways. You can interpret this in the spiritual and philosophical way that I would tend to interpret it, or you can interpret it in the following quote. This is one of my favorite things that Louis C.K. has said, and it's not even a joke. He said that emotions don't lie to you. You might not know why they're there and why they came up, but they're not lying to you. You have to figure out why they're there. You have to wrestle with them. You have to get to understand them. You have to give them space so that they can manifest themselves and get the message across to you, emotion, gut feeling, heart. You get the pattern.
Yeah, man. It makes me think of like, I think a lot of us could benefit from resuscitation of trust within ourselves and the world around us. The challenge is when you have an environment, like environment trumps will. So someone who is working really hard towards something has a higher likelihood of reverting and adapting to the environment rather than the other way around. And so if we can start, I think, feeling and experiencing trust around us in the world to a greater degree, we'll start having more confidence to practice that within ourselves as well too. But the paradox is also having the capacity to do that first, then allows us to trust into the environment a little more as well. And I feel like that's an important muscle for us to be exercising. I think of it, and it again brings me back to noticing first, with the opportunity for awareness, with the opportunity for action or behavior to shift, and for the opportunity to have a different outcome. And I love that, like, because a lot of people, most of us are wired to think that happiness is somewhere else, as if it's hiding behind a tree. Or me and you, when we connect, it's you make me happy, I make you happy. No, maybe that too, but there's an aspect of it. Like, do you have a friend that when you're with them, you're just already smiling in preparation? It's like happiness and joy just arise
Yeah,
when
yeah,
you're in the presence of others. It's an experience that's there rather than a thing that you transact to get. And I
yeah,
think being available to that and available to that trust and that truth within yourself allows it to just arise. And if emotions are one of the avenues to that truth, beautiful. Tune
yeah,
in.
yeah. It's like wrestling, you know, the yin and the yang, the all sorts of polarity, you know, metaphors and analogies, and yeah, I feel that way when we talk. Like, I know that when we have a conversation, that we're going to approach one another with trust and with generosity. I think is a good word here as well. Whether you give someone the opportunity to express themselves or to feel a certain feeling, think a certain thought. Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you something about a modern contemporary phenomenon, which is the rampant use of GLP-1s, Ozempic, semaglutide, all the alternatives. Because I remember
Yeah.
you once
ER
told me,
expertise here.
no, no, no. I know there's going to be some value here because I've read papers, I've heard stories, and I've seen cases that come through the ED that I'm not sure because, as the radiologist, I'm not the one taking the history from the patient, but I do read through the notes and try to understand what's going on with this person. And I think it was you who told me that people who are abusing these drugs, they're coming in with a whole slew of presentations, mostly gastrointestinal, that most people wouldn't relate to these accessory organ complications, for example. What are you and your colleagues, you know, seeing and reporting? And maybe you can talk about the importance of knowing to look for it, because if you don't know to look for it, you won't even recognize that there's a connection.
Yeah. Well, I think now medicine has actually acknowledged the term that when we were starting to see GLPs come out and you and I spoke about it, I mentioned some aspect of iatrogenic gastroparesis, which was like the medicine that was causing this thing. Like, there's diabetics will have the like a neuropathy to their stomach that will make the stomach not have the same signaling for food transition to go through. And a lot of the byproduct mechanisms of how GLP-1s were affecting people's relationship to food was also slowing the motility of their stomach, that was giving feedback to their brain, that was then inhibiting and disincentivizing their uh, their eating habit, especially when it was in an unconscious coping behavior mode. Now, what that was translating to secondarily, and maybe you see this if you do like calcium studies on the heart and that, but we predicted that there'd be effects on the heart. And because there's a 25% reduction of people who have in muscle for people who are on Ozempic. I forget the specific timeline. The muscle of the heart, though it's mainly cartilaginous, also is affected as well too. And I think it's too early to say if there's going to be cardiac etiologies that are associated with that. But there's a strong component to it. On the other side, GLP-1 are peptides that are have a have an interesting fight ahead of them that's coming, because peptides are beautiful compounds, and a lot of the pharma companies may seek to keep that illegal for it to be formed in any way other than through pharmaceutical pathways, and that's going to be a big hindrance to otherwise medical breakthroughs. And I can tell you from another side that people are taking chances and also having great outcomes on things like BPC 157, which is another peptide. But I had a patient a few weeks ago, actually, who he was 42 and he's talking to me about all the peptides that he's on. And the first thing he's communicating to me and I'm seeing is someone who cares for his health, someone who's intentional about his health, someone who also doesn't trust the system to offer him the medicine that he would seek to have for the goals that he has in his life. And he was a really well balanced looking guy, not extreme, not orthorexic, but he was using tools to get to a different level that he felt his nature couldn't get to. But then I asked him a question and he became like he was warped in the words that he answered. And I thought this is an interesting response. I asked him a few more questions and there was more illogic to it. His wife was there and I asked him, what have you been noticing this type of things where there's these transient nonsensical statements that he's saying? Because then I asked him something else, like who's the prime minister of the United States? And he's like, and it was intentionally illogical, but he wasn't able to notice that illogic. His
Mm-hmm.
wife said it's been happening for 2 or 3 weeks. So I said, look, this might sound ridiculous, but let's do a CT scan. The rest of his neurological exam was completely normal. He ends up having a 7 by 4 by 8 centimeter mass in his Wernicke's and like Broca's area. And I realized in that moment, almost horrified, that a peptide that is stimulating growth, what does that do when there's a carcinogenic component to it? And so there's some caution, I think, to be had with peptides as well, too. I got him to stop it, not knowing what the side effect of that is, but I feel that there's amazing benefit from peptides, GLP-1s, but I think an important thing to be considering is what's your why? Are you aware of the full outcome? Is medicine being fully transparent of the potential impacts of it as well too? And do you have the humility to find out a little later on that maybe the incentives that you had for taking the thing was actually not for your highest good and for your foundational health?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of interesting ways to take that. But first of all, commendation for recognizing that this man who otherwise seemed like he's optimizing his health for some reason just isn't making sense. Like that, you know, echoes back to what I was saying in the beginning, which is to be a good physician and the demands of emergency medicine, you have to be locked in. Like any other environment where things are a little bit more laid back, laissez-faire, maybe someone doesn't notice this speech problem, and they didn't. It was recognized in the emergency department. What a coincidence. So, commendation for that, of course.
Thanks,
But
man.
then the other thing is, I'm kind of split on not just peptides, I'm kind of split on all synthetic drugs, but peptides are in vogue. And so I'm kind of split on it because obviously there are peptides that have great effects. Let's say BPC 157. My understanding, I don't know a lot because I haven't experimented on this with myself. I don't have any patients that take it. So I read and I try to understand and I try to generate a map that helps me figure this out. But from what I can tell, there are circumstances where any given peptide or drug or plant, whatever, can be of benefit. Where where I have a problem with any of these things is that you're using them in a way that's you're trading off. There's a huge trade-off. Like you wouldn't give a person who's sleep deprived caffeine so they can continue to be sleep deprived. You shouldn't give somebody something that's used to suppress their appetite if their reason for their metabolic syndrome, let's say to begin with, is because they're nutritionally deficient. Like that doesn't make any sense to me because a person who's diabetic, insulin resistant, whatever spectrum of metabolic, what is it called? Syndrome X manifestation you have.
Mm.
The solution isn't to make them, to help them tolerate starvation. They're already nutritionally starved. That's why they have unhealthy relationship with food.
Yeah.
So the same with the BPC, the same with any peptide or the new ones that people are using for sleep and recovery and this and that. It's like you can use it, you can experiment with it, you can see, but it should tell you something. You know, when you have a huge benefit from something like BPC 157 or a sleep aid or whatever, it should tell you that maybe you're not as healthy as you thought you were. Maybe you're not taking care of yourself the way that you should. And to depend on these things is not going to do you long term good.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes me think of how humans want all upside without any of the downside. And more importantly, I haven't I haven't found one tool that is not being misused or abused by another person. A beautiful drone to fly and capture photography now is used on warfare. Like a gun for hunting is used to end someone else's life. Like there's aspects of tools that are misused and abused, and I think there's a return to again our foundations, which makes people really mindful about when I do a thing, what's my incentive and what am I willing to trade off here? And I think medicine can actually use that to its advantage if they're ever prescribing it. It has to, I think, non-negotiably be brought forward as a bridge. So this is being used as a bridge, and the bridge is not just to a new possibility, but a new shift in perception of awareness of possibility. Because if the person believes that they can be something or they can't be something, they might not go there. But if they experience it once, they're like, whoa, that can actually happen. Now, if the physician empowers them and supports them, hopefully they can get to that place themselves. But if the healthcare provider can support them to trust that there's a possibility for perception to arise that they can get to a place, maybe they won't end up using that medicine after. But that bridge for awareness was necessary in the first place. And I feel like if we did that, it would be a lot more humbling and a lot less dependent on a tool. But medicine, just like pharma, all of them, we feel that the tendency is that we just say, here's the pill to the outcome, and it doesn't end up showing how the person can be empowered in being the outcome without that thing. And maybe in some healthcare instances, like that's necessary, like blood thinners for pulmonary embolism, you
Hmm.
do need the medicine and you benefit from the upside of that. There's still that 4% possibility of internal bleeding that does come with some of them, and 1 to 3% for other ones. But we take that big upside, and it's a beautiful tool. Why don't we see people abusing anticoagulants? Because it doesn't have any more upside than that. And so if we're very mindful of incentives, that'll be a really powerful thing. And I think BPC 157 and all these type of peptides, it attracts a certain type of population of people that want all upside. They're willing to misuse or abuse a tool, but they end up ultimately inadvertently, I think, misusing and abusing themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. All true. So let's play devil's advocate here because there's a good point to be made. Let's say a person, I don't know, for whatever reason, a person feels like they have no other way of getting into the health state, the kind of vitality that they're aiming for by natural means. And so they've decided that they're going to use these adjuncts chronically, intermittently, whatever, because they would prefer a good, shorter life than a shittier, longer life.
Is that an Alan
How do
Watts
you
quote?
handle those people?
I don't think they ever state it like that.
No.
If that's that would be a great point of awareness for them to have. Is I'd say that when you're unconscious or unaware, your tendency is to actually extend your life, believing that you live immortally as long as possible. But quality of life, I forget what they say, health span, lifespan. I don't think it's not a longevity thing; it's a depth thing, which seeks to embrace today and now to a greater degree. And maybe the whole thing starts with us reclarifying what is the most nutritious thing to your life experience. And it may be clearing, like doing an inventory of everything that you take in, not just the foods, not just the liquids, not
Hmm.
just but the people, the environment, even the information that you consume. They are so important to what your foundational health is. And I'm reminding myself as I even say this. There's a book by um, I forget his name, but the book is called The End of Craving. And The End of Craving, his big take home when he's talking about how we have a lot of the disasters of humanity that are getting worse, the health crisis that a lot of the world is facing, metabolic disease, people's quality of life dropping. His simple invitation is to fall in love with food again and to eat intentionally and slow down to the pace of the meal itself. Fall in love with the process of the preparation, and you just get immersed in it. And it's slowing down that ends up being you involved with this foundation, like your feet flat firmly on the ground. I think a lot of us are walking on our tippy toes and floating away so far from our foundations. But that can be one of the ways that bring us forward. And I think a lot of people will reconsider some of the molecules that they reach for to cope for what they thought was the life that they wanted to live, where then it then balances both longevity, but more important, the appreciation of here and now. That's
Yeah.
that's where I would keep that.
Yeah. Look, you keep referencing the foundation, and I like that because this really comes to the foundation of these pillars. Like beneath these pillars that I've modeled, there is a foundation. And in that foundation, broadly speaking, it's knowing yourself. You know, it's very easy to get to be distracted by the goals, ambitions, and the standards that other people want to set for what it means to be healthy. Your coronary artery calcium score is low, your VO2 max is high, you're shredded, you can fast for a certain period, whatever it is. Bridging the foundation and the meaning, the spirit. It's like for me, for example, I don't think that I would want to live a shorter life or a longer life where I can't use my hands or I can't read or communicate with other people. That has nothing to do with my body fat percentage, my VO2 max, how shredded I am, the quality of my sleep that I can measure on an Oura ring that might be causing more harm than helping. Like all of these things, they all
Yeah.
depend on you and like knowing yourself. So this is why I think one of the most important things that a physician can do, and why I think the work that you do is so important, which is to pay attention to people, is to help them figure out who they are. Because before you do, like everyone wants to talk about personalized medicine, but what they really mean is order expensive tests and look for treatments that don't exist because you are looking at way too high of a spatial resolution with genes and protein and enzyme assays, when really it can be as simple as like, what do you like? What kind of an
Yeah.
environment are you comfortable in? Are you comfortable in a hot environment, a humid environment, a cool environment? You know, these are personalizations to a person's life, to all of the lifestyle decisions they have to make.
Yeah. Man, as you say that, my feet are frozen. And I
Still
think that
cold in
there's
Canada, eh?
yeah. My fiance, she grew up in northern Canada where it's like -50, and my genetics are from the deserts of Iran in Abadan. So we find a balance. The important thing that you're mentioning here that I feel that everyone can benefit so much from, especially if you're listening this far, which is amazing. You get clearer on who you are by knowing to a greater degree who you're not. And I think a lot of us have the most amount of insight actually from where we feel intolerance in our life, because that's real clarification on who we're not anymore. And the funny thing is we may still be upholding that story that's holding the story of who we're not. And I don't know if you've heard of the black coffee analogy. There's this thing, you go to a coffee shop and you want a latte, and you go to up to the barista and they're like, what would you like? And you're like, I know I don't want a black coffee. And they're like, okay, so what would you like? And you're like, I know I don't want a black coffee. And they're like, okay, well, what do you want? And they're like, I'm sure I don't want the black coffee. And their barista's trying to shake you to say, okay, well, what do you want? You're like, I don't want the black coffee. Say what you want. Get clear on what you want and start saying it, because maybe you've been really clear that you don't want the black coffee anymore. And I feel that many aspects of our life, it is just getting clarification on that, because then it shifts where we don't want to be anymore to where we'd like to be. And I think our foundations reassess ourselves, just like the garden where we re-clarify. We're like, wow, I've actually been in someone else's garden for a long period of time. I'd like to come back to my own. And the the awareness of that's huge, because someone like Carl Jung would say that the greatest burden that a child carries is the unlived life of the parent. And if they're internalizing the unconscious aspect of the parent or the sociocultural environment that they were brought up in, or their parent experience that then has now been transferred to their child that now they also hold. It's an opportunity to come back, and it may be the first time that you step into a garden that's your own. And it may be unfamiliar, yet it feels on a level of soul that it is. Trust those little intuitions as they come through, and you'll start shifting from black coffee to the declaration of the latte that you've been seeking for a long period of time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It also requires a generosity to yourself, you know. And I don't think I think a lot of people don't give themselves that generosity. They accept the
What's
the
in the way?
being. Well, I think a lot of the times people accept the being that's imposed onto them, whether it's from society or their assumptions about themselves or what they've been kind of. I forget who was saying this. It, I don't remember the name, but he said something along the lines of, when you were a child, you wanted to be something, anything. Like you could be anything. You could be an astronaut, you could be a football player, you could be a doctor, whatever. It's only over time, with your interactions with other human beings in society, that you were told that you couldn't be those things or that you shouldn't even try. But the child in you, or how should we say it, the innocent in you, understood that you're a creation, let's say, of God. And with that creation, there's a divinity in you that allows you to be whatever it is that you want to manifest. And a lot of people don't, oh, I'm not smart enough for that. I don't have time for this. There's more, my boss needs this. I'm doing this for this person or the other person. Like, well, what about being generous to yourself?
Well, incentives are driving them there. And if they are unaware of the incentive of the important pull of the soul, there may be a time they can be forgiven for not having been aware. I think that's one of my foundations when it comes to complete unawareness. Ignorance, in contrast, is having the opportunity to be aware of something and not choosing to engage with it. And I think as people do processes of self-discovery, the voices, the stories of our soul and our spirit become more and more available to us, and it becomes undeniable to not see them. And so when we start reaching into old incentives for old stories or places that we no longer want to be, the knocks of intolerance for if we were to not nourish the soul and spirit start getting louder and louder. And so we potentially start saying no to the boss, and we start saying yes to the things that are more aligned with our soul, our spirit, and we come back closer to us over time. And I feel that that's an important muscle that we need to be giving permission to ourselves, because at its core, if we're not, one, it could be unawareness, but the other one is absence of permission, which may be due to guilt, shame, or judgment of ourselves. But I've come to realize that guilt, shame, and judgment are often the internalized voices of others. Anyone who you had to depend upon, or you opened your heart to, or trusted, at some point get internalized, but it belongs to them that we're then repeating in our own voice, but it's not the truth. And it's an opportunity for you to catch that. There's this process called taking your thoughts to court, which is you put it up there and you ask for the proof. And if you can't find the proof, you catch that it's actually a story, a narrative that you uphold, and not a truth or reality. And now that opportunity allows you to shift. And then you get clearer again on who you are and who you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. I think that allows us to wrap this up on a quote that from Rumi again, if I may. It's not a direct quote of the whole poem, but it's a little excerpt where he says, don't think of yourself so small. You are the entire universe in ecstatic motion. And that's such a beautiful image, that all that you are is everything that there is, and vice versa. So give yourself, like you were saying, the space, the time, the generosity, the opportunity. Okay, well, this has been wonderful. We should obviously do this again sometime, if in person, even better. Why don't you let people know where they can find you, if they're interested in you, if they want to learn more about your
Sure.
views on life and health and all sorts of things?
Sure. I love that quote, by the way. Rumi really stands out as someone that, like, he's a foundation of heart, love, spirit in my heart as well, too. And I wish that for everyone. It's Kaveh Kavusi everywhere, Kaveh, Kavoosi. On Twitter mainly, that's where I like to explore the mind, but also on Instagram. And I'm working on a project right now, either calling it Recess or Emergency, which is a play on emergency, where I'd like to immerse into the lives with people in emergent spaces. So that's where I'm going to be spending the majority of my time to help the health of the healthcare worker ultimately be more available to their own lives, their patient, and their loved ones. And that's I feel like that's what's necessary in a world where it's more difficult to connect to ourselves.
Amazing. Thank you, Kaveh.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. Thank you.